2006 was a hysterical time for pop culture. Like, everyone kind of knows what you mean when you say something has 2006 energy. Look at this PS2 game. Metal finish, too cool for school, slanted font, big blue angry looking The Rock, shiny sports car with guns attached. 2006 energy, right? 2006 PS2 games have their own certain energy too. The 360 was out, the Wii and PS3 were coming out, but the PS2 was still the biggest console ever, so late in the PS2's life we got games like 24 the Game, or the Quantum of Solace port, or that weird Reservoir Dogs game, or Made Man... or Made Man, where all of these games kind of felt like PS3 games that were stuck on the PS2. In the same way early PS2 games can feel like PS1 games with better graphics, late PS2 games often feel like clunky PS3 games with worse graphics. In stumbles a desperate, dying mid-2000s Midway Games, the publisher behind such later hits as Vin Diesel's Wheelman and Stranglehold, both of which employed the same strategy of throwing movie stars into games and hoping they'd be hits. They weren't, and so this seems like a silly strategy in retrospect, and it was laughed at the time to some extent, but with the early 2000s boom of licensed movie games like Lord of the Rings and 007 and Harry Potter all killing it in the sales charts, it's not hard to see why Suits would greenlight games that simply feature movie stars. Midway, in their desperation to stay afloat, were also in the business of nostalgia, of capitalizing on their old IPs, because they used to be such a powerhouse in the arcades. And so around that time, they released a Gauntlet reboot and a Rampage reboot and a bunch of not so great Mortal Kombat sequels that no one ever seems to talk about anymore, and a Cruis'n reboot, which is kind of just a port of a Fast and Furious arcade game, but that's a story for another day, and of course a few SpyHunter games, none of which really made a splash. So when you take a big melting pot and throw in a dying publisher with their specific movie star old IP reviving strategy, the late PS2 game landscape, and a big dollop of 2006 pop culture, it's inevitable that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's SpyHunter Nowhere to Run would be the exact game to take shape.
Didn't anyone ever tell you it's rude to point?
Just like Wheelman after it, SpyHunter Nowhere to Run was apparently meant to have come out alongside an accompanying film, which seems to have been stuck in dev hell, seeing announcements of directors and writers signing and quitting all the way up until the most recent update in 2015. It's never officially been cancelled. At one point, John Woo was on board to make it with a $90 million budget, and I shed a tear at the cheesy nonsense that we missed out on there, but at least we got this movie game that has no movie. For a quick crash course on what SpyHunter actually is, it started in the arcades in 1983 as a vertically scrolling driving game. It was initially intended as a 007 game, but Midway couldn't get the Bond license, so it's just very 007-y, complete with a gadget-equipped car that transforms into a boat. It was a smash hit, it was ported to everything, it had a sequel in 1987, it had a reboot and a sequel to that reboot in the early 2000s, another reboot in 2012 for the 3DS and Vita. There's been a lot of attempts to make SpyHunter a thing again, and of course there was The Rock's SpyHunter in 2006. Looking back on the original in retrospect, it's very much an endless runner like you'd find on mobile these days. Like, it can be looked at as an ancestor to something like Temple Run or Subway Surfers. None of the reboot-era SpyHunter games are endless runners though, they're mission-based driving games with vehicle combat, exactly what you'd expect for a modernization. The Rock's game, though, is more interesting, not only because of the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, but because it aims a bit higher, where on top of the driving, it throws in on-foot missions with third-person shooting and hand-to-hand combat with The Rock's motion-captured signature wrestling moves, which means you can rock-bottom people, and you'll want to.
You're a dead.
It's easy to forget now that The Rock's brand in 2006 was still leaning wrestler first, movie star second. This was Scorpion King Doom movie Rock, so he's more subdued and more stoic than what we're used to from him now, but even still, he's a bit underused here. You don't get the meme value out of him the same way you did with Vin Diesel in Wheelman, and you do get the vibe in cutscenes that anyone could be playing this guy, but you know, it's The Rock, so I guess that's amusing in and of itself.
But she's still alive. How the hell is that a success?
Got her phone number.
I gave you an order!
To put a bullet in one of our own? No way I'm doing that.
Alex Decker is a spy for the International Espionage Service and sports a handlebar mustache for one mission and drives the Interceptor and is on the run from the very vague Bond villainy group Nostra, who are trying to take over the world or something. I don't know. It definitely feels like I need to watch the non-existent movie to really understand what the point of any of this is, because what's here is very much like there's bad guys, you're trying to stop them, have fun. Cutscenes are fast, grainy, usually serve as containers for banter or action that would be harder to do in engine, and they're good for pushing the story forward and keeping everything cheesy, but bad at introducing anything, and they're very roughly cut.
Alex? They sent you to kill me?
Nothing personal. Just following orders.
What was that unzipping noise? Like, I've watched this clip like 10 times and I still can't figure it out. My theory is that he was meant to rip off his mustache, but for whatever reason there was never a non-mustache model made for him, so he just keeps the mustache and the sound effect, and it's amazing.
Nothing personal. Just following orders.
The B-game vibes here are off the charts. You got the Matrix slow-mo dive moment, you got crazy ragdoll physics, giant mech enemies, a sexy scientist, you got the chain-wearing, open-shirted, scar-faced villain guy, you got a big blue picture of The Rock for some loading screens, and you got these brilliantly loud punching noises.
I'm gonna get...
Light punch, heavy punch, weapon pickups, grab, finisher. The way the heavy punch and the melee weapons just ragdoll enemies to the floor is wonderful, and with a good amount of physics objects and destructible bits in every room, there's a simple cathartic joy to smashing enemies into all the shelves. I love how you can pick up enemies and throw them too, like throwing dudes off balconies or off the side of a boat is a delight, and there's such a cheese to the way you just grab guys above your head like a wrestler would. This isn't a deep, and it's definitely not a smart combat system by any means, and it's very exploitable in that you can just trivially spam the same moves over and over, but it's fun in a basic, cathartic, punchy way, so to speak. Unfortunately, the majority of your time on foot, and really the majority of your time playing this game, is spent shooting rather than punching, where aiming itself is a bit laborious, walking speed is slow, the cover system is so off-putting that you won't use it after the first time you try it, and it can just feel like you're sinking bullets into uncaring bad AI enemies. But on the other hand, it does have single button grenade throwing, which is nice. Those physics objects and ragdoll physics bring some much needed impact. It mostly mirrors modern game mechanics, so there's a comfortable familiarity there, and it has a really, really powerful shotgun, so, you know, not all bad. Driving is fast. It's a lot like the vehicle levels in the EA Bond games of the time, which is fitting considering how SpyHunter started. You speed forwards, dodging obstacles, shooting lock-on missiles, and avoiding explosions, while your car sometimes transforms into a boat and a bike. I love the first time the bike is revealed, where you speed away from a missile that's chasing you through a tunnel. It's so corny, and these driving sequences are challenging but not too challenging in a way that's not totally mindless, which I know sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it's genuinely surprising for this B game to be occasionally thrilling when you're having to quickly dodge missiles raining down from a helicopter or rocks falling from a cliff while your health is low. There's a lot of jank to put up with here, as there is across the whole game, where it can bug out and the crashing physics especially are sketchy, but the driving is fun in a basic, kinetic, monkey brain, fast car, big explosions sort of way, and for what this game's going for, that's kind of all it needs to be. If you're plainly looking at Nowhere to Run as a mix of fighting, shooting, and driving, this is the best of the three, and it's unfortunate then that there's only a handful of driving missions.
It was in a game, yeah, SpyHunter, 2006. I'm still loving my 3 out of 10 review from Game Informer, by the way. 3 out of 10.
It's honestly hard to argue with Nowhere to Run's reviews. This isn't a hidden gem or an underrated masterpiece or whatever the YouTuber term is at the moment. 007 Everything or Nothing did basically everything this game does but better, and 2.5 years earlier, and to think that this released only 2 months before Gears of War is kind of laughable. It only took me 3.5 hours to finish, and in 2006, as a full-priced release on what was technically last-gen consoles at the time, the 51 out of 100 on Metacritic is more than understandable. But, and there is a but, if there's only one thing that Nowhere to Run really excels at, aside from maybe the wacky ragdoll physics and mid-2000s cheese aesthetics, it's the pacing. Its pacing, I think, holds the whole product together. Like, one moment you're rock-bottoming bad guys on a boat, then you're shooting your way through the jungle, then sneaking past lasers, then doing burnout takedowns, and then fighting your way through the ice caps in a speedboat, then through someone's mansion villa, then you're fighting a mecha crab thing, then you take control of your own mecha crab thing and start shooting all the other mecha crab things in a first-person gladiator mecha crab fight where you become the best mecha crab of all the mecha crabs and you're the Rock. And while none of this is even close to a game design masterclass, none of it is outright bad either. And how it just shotguns game mechanics and sequences back to back in a few-hour package can make it a bit of a romp if, and this is a big if, you can stomach the clunkiness and badness of it all. Just as you start to get sick of the shooting, you're suddenly driving, or if you're sick of one location, you're suddenly in another, most of the time. And after a few hours, just before you start to get sick of the whole game and really realize how shallow all the mechanics are, it simply ends. Put that quote on the box. If the 3-hour runtime was an obvious criticism when this was a full-priced release, it's a selling point now that it's a $5 trip back in time, or a disc image download if you play things a little fast and loose. And there's enough little highlights and fun moments to keep you going, like that mecha crab stuff.
Don't let him get away.
Ragdolling a dude with a wrench and then throwing that wrench at another dude as the Rock, then blowing them off their feet with the super punchy shotgun is just fun. And it's moments like this, or just using the shotgun at all, or chasing down a train on the super snappy bike, that the game is at its best. Like, there's these frictive little nuggets of game design that may be few and far between, but they add a lot of spice. At its worst, you're still occasionally slogging through a mediocre sewer level, and there's these flying enemies or these armored enemies that are just an absolute pain, and there's a lot to be desired with the shootouts, and especially the story. Like, it jumps and cuts in ways that feels like parts are simply missing. At one point, you're taking down a boss by crashing your car into their helicopter. Amazing. And then it hard cuts to a loading screen, then suddenly you're sieging a house with no real explanation as to why. Ultimately, Nowhere to Run's flaws do limit it from being anything more than amusing but forgettable, and I think a tighter story that used the Rock better could have helped it be something more. It also ends on a cliffhanger, which doesn't help. Like, maybe this game was going to set up the film. But I played this when I was stuck sick on the couch, and it served as an incredibly palatable time waster. It absolutely could be better, but where a decent but behind the curve last-gen corny 3-hour action game meant bad reviews and no sales in 2006, in 2023 it serves as a laid-back, cheesy return to the PS2's library thanks to its modern enough sensibilities. Like, it basically just follows the Uncharted formula, but before Uncharted existed, and so it's easy to pick up and run with now because of it. Sometimes I have to force myself through a game for a video, but that wasn't at all the case here. Also, how good would an Uncharted-esque The Rock game be now? They should really make that and call it Red Notice Nowhere to Run. Packaged in is a handful of unlocks, including a behind-the-scenes making-of video and a really quite strange remake of the original SpyHunter using Nowhere to Run's assets and engine. Like, if you want a buggier, weirder version of the original game, then this is exactly that, I guess. So yeah, I can't bring myself to close this video with a recommendation or really tell you to go seek this one out. It really is just a fairly decent 6 out of 10 with a fun vibe, but sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly what you're after. It's fascinating as a piece of The Rock's career and the PS2's library and of Midway's history, or of their downfall, and ultimately, SpyHunter Nowhere to Run serves best as an approachable PS2 B game time capsule. And there we wrap up the first video of 2023. Welcome to 2023. Happy New Year. Hope you're all well. If you liked this video, the best way you can help out is by supporting me on Patreon, and the second best way you can help out is by liking and commenting and doing the stuff that YouTubers always ask you to do, because I've noticed in my analytics when I ask you to do it, more of you do it, and that helps. And thank you. If you want to watch my Wheelman video, I have a Wheelman video, and I have a Stranglehold video. If you're into these late 2000s, mid to late 2000s Midway cheese fests, then I have videos on the 3 big ones now, which is great. Yeah, this video, like, this game is not super deep or super interesting from a game design perspective, but I really did enjoy it going through a sick day just playing it. So I wanted to talk about it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you to all my patrons coming up on the screen. Love you all. Good stuff. Love your work. Supporting me. Yeah, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.
How many creative ways can you kill somebody?